What does holiness look like in daily life? Today, we explore how faith leads us to welcome migrants with justice, dignity, and love.
Welcome to Perspectives, a podcast where the clergy women of the First United Methodist Church of San Diego share their musings on scripture, theology, and what it has to do with us.
Welcome to Perspectives. Today, we continue our conversation on Imago Dei 2.0, exploring what it means not only to affirm that every person bears the image of God, but also to live as though we truly believe it. And our focus today is migrants, their dignity, courage, gifts, and contributions to our communities. I'm Reverend Hannah. Today I'm joined by Nyla Marson, one of our Patreon clients as well, who has been showing up at the Courthouse every week to stand alongside migrants and others affected by our immigration system. Nyla, thanks for joining us today.
It's good to be here.
Thank you. Before we talk about your experiences, I would like to begin with these words from Leviticus chapter 19, verses 33 and 34. When an alien resides with you in your land, you shall not oppress the alien. The alien who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And some translations use the word alien, and I can't even pronounce it with my ESL tongue. Today, we are more likely to say immigrants, migrants, foreigners, international people, ethnic people, or whatever. But the command is unmistakable. And do not oppress them. Treat them like citizens among you. Love them as yourself. So let's begin with your story, Nyla. What first moved you to join these courthouse protests? And what happens when you gather there? And what do you hope your presence communicates to migrants and their families? I want to hear your story and your experience.
Well, you know, it's funny. I started doing that because it just seemed like the right thing to do. There was a woman in United Women in Faith at the Encinitas Church, and she just said, you know, what's going on with immigrants in the community is not right, and she started us basically a group going down there. Initially, it was Tuesday and Thursday, and then we're all there Thursday, and Tuesday kind of faded off. And initially it was, I was there with like one or two other people on occasion. And then it's been kind of fun because it started to grow. I've been able to meet people from the other Methodist churches in the area. We have a whole pink shirt lady crew that get down there and wear our pink
Standing
shirts
up for justice.
Standing up for justice. And we've actually become known. Like, people look for us. They're like, oh, there's the ladies in the pink shirts.
Oh, okay, good.
So, which has been, I'm going to get ahead of myself, but it's towards the end of your question. You said, like, the impact that it makes. And I think having us as a group of, I think the biggest group we've had is probably about 8 to 10 people.
Wow.
All in our pink shirts.
Yes, noticeable.
And so it is noticeable, and it does have an impact. But initially, like, I was, it was difficult for me to deal with what was happening and kind of the vilification of immigrants in the country and the current administration's change in some of the policies. And so it felt like being able to do something was what we were called to do.
Yes.
And so through the United Women in Faith group that was there, it made it an easy thing to step into. And initially, some people were going actually to the courts, because we're right in front of the courthouse and we're on the street. And I actually never went up there. I was going to at one point. They do special training sometimes for people. But I talked to several others who had been, and they said they actually felt like we make more of an impact being on the street and creating some visibility. So we've been doing that for over a year now.
Wow.
And initially it was really just us. Sometimes there'd be a few other people. After the Renee Good and Alex Preddy killings, there's Indivisible group has hosted different people that show up. They show up a couple hours before we do, so I feel like now we have an opening act, and then we will join them partway whenever we get there, and then we stay a little bit later. And so it's been interesting also to see the change in the energy level and like what other people are doing and what other people are saying. There's a little stage out there, and so it's been interesting to see the evolution of even our protest out there. The other part we see in an evolution is we get a lot more positive honks and waves and thumbs up. Yes. We still get a few of these and some other finger messages, but for the most part, it's much. It's a lot more positive. Where I think it used to be kind of a blend, and now we really feel like there's more positive. And so I feel like that's an impact that we're making, is that we're standing up for something, and people will come by on the street and they'll talk to us, and it's very interesting to hear, again, for our opportunity to kind of explain why we're there and what we're doing. We do say that we are people of faith, and we do this because we believe it's the right thing to do for our faith. Some of our signs have Bible verses, that Matthew tells us, like to love your neighbor, and and then Leviticus, of course, commands it, right?
Yes, and that's the origin of Matthew version.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. So Matthew, speaking to the Jewish audience, wanted to borrow from the Hebrew Bible to make sure that the author of Matthew speaks to the same audience. So you're not off. So it sounds like it started by the initiation of one person and joining some of the people of faith together, and also collaborating people out there standing up for those migrants at the courthouse. And I just cannot imagine the impact that your presence makes to the comfort of those migrants walking into the courthouse.
Yeah. We frequently do get people that come by that are going into the courthouse, and they'll say, thank you for being here. Thank you for making a difference.
And those of us who are not at the courthouse every week may encounter immigration, mainly through news reports and statistics and political arguments. And you have been close enough to encounter the actual people who come say hello and thank you, and their families. So I was wondering, would you share something you have witnessed that has stayed with you after you left the courthouse? And what have migrants and their families taught you by watching them?
Well, I mean, a couple ways of answering that question. I think there's, because we're down there on a weekly basis, we do see people going in. We do hear some of the stories, even though a lot of times we're not directly communicating with the immigrants, but we do. And one of the, I think the things that to me kind of is it says I'm not saying that well. Part of one of the stories is I think it shows, it's an example of the way that the current administration is looking at immigrants, and we at one point there was a woman, a young woman, 19, who had been picked up the night before, and from kind of down in South San Diego. And so her car was impounded, and they had basically took everything she had on her, and they put her in detention, because underneath the courthouse, they actually have like a temporary detention area, and they had put her down there. And she spent the night in detention. And the next day she said, well, like, can I get out? And they said, well, no, not until we charge you. And she says, but no, they're not going to charge me with anything. Well, the reason they were going to charge her is because she's a U.S. citizen. She was born in Puerto Rico, which is a U.S. You know, and there was nothing that she had. I mean, she wasn't doing anything for them to pick her up other than driving while brown, right?
And wearing skin color.
Exactly. And so when they did put her, they let her out, but they let her out without anything. So she had no car, she had no phone, she had no wallet, no money. So she was standing there starting to cry, and somebody said, you know, you should go talk to those ladies with the pink shirts.
Oh my gosh.
And in one of our group, not me so much, but one of our group, a couple of them took her home to their home, cleaned her up, gave her something to eat, was able to get her phone and charge it so she could call her father, and he was able to come and get her and at least take her home. And they did have to pay for her car to come out of impound, even though she had done nothing. And she was not an immigrant at all. She was a U.S. born citizen.
Yeah.
So I think, and that's not an unusual story. I mean, I there are instances of that we've seen. There's the other thing that I think a lot of people say, well, people shouldn't enter this country illegally. And there are people who come in undocumented. And a lot of the people that are being picked up or are being detained are not necessarily coming in illegally. They've been allowed to come in under asylum status or under some other status.
Yeah.
And one was that we saw was a sheriff. So he's a sheriff in San Diego County, and his wife was in the process of getting her green card. And she was showing up to court because she was thought she was in the last stage of being able to get her green card. And they said, no, we're going to change your status, and you need to leave. You need to leave the country. And they were holding her. I don't know the end of the story, but there was some, whether they were going to actually deport her or whether they were going to give her an ankle bracelet, and which is basically house arrest.
Yeah.
And so the husband was out with a stroller, a stroller, because they had a newborn baby. And so so here's this husband who is a U.S. citizen, clearly, and his wife was legally going through the process, and he now has a new baby, and it might have his wife be deported.
And that's a perfect story about this woman who just gave birth, and this sheriff, a man, her husband, and this newborn baby, innocent. And when they're treated as case numbers or statistics or like problems to serve or figure out, we downplay the image of God embedded in her. And the image of God cannot be reduced to an immigration status or political category or tied to a place of birth when her kid was born here. So your story reminded me that every person carries a story, relationships, labor, wisdom, fear sometimes, and humor, and bears hope. And Imago Dei means that we do not merely feel sorry for migrants. We recognize them as neighbors, teachers, community builders, chiefs, sheriff's wife, and also bearers of God's presence. So today's text begins with, Leviticus chapter 19 begins with God saying, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." And we sometimes separate the holiness in Sunday worship and secularness out in the world. And holiness as personal purity and or separation from the world. But this book places worship and ethics side by side. And if you read the entire chapter 19, it speaks about worship. It speaks about leaving food for people who have trouble finding food, paying workers fairly, protecting vulnerable people and rejecting hatred, respecting elders, and loving aliens, immigrants, as ourselves. The Matthew chapter, love your neighbor as yourself, comes from loving your aliens as yourself.
Yeah.
Neighbors is softened, but the original text says aliens, immigrants. So this is not a side note in the scripture. It's a central theme. And the sanctuary in which God's holiness is revealed is not limited to a church building. The entire chapter talks about how it extends to where you encounter those people out in the field, leaving some food out in the field for others to glean, and into your workplaces, neighborhoods, and public institutions, and in your case, courthouse. So, do you experience your presence at the courthouse do you think of it as an expression of your faith? Has it changed the way you understand worship and where you encounter God?
I mean, I do definitely see it as an expression of my faith. I mean, that's part of the incentive of it being there is we are, and we show up very intentionally as women in faith. And we relate to other people that way. And sometimes the language gets a little salty with some of the other organizations that are there. And that's where we're like,
but we will have the same
there's certain things that we don't put on our signs that other people do. But I think all of it is kind of bringing that we see it as a charge of God.
Yes.
That this is what's expected of us.
Yes.
And that we can make a difference.
Yes, and broadening our scope to see the divine in every person, including immigrants and your fellow protesters.
Well, and I'll share with you. So I grew up in a very culturally diverse area in Oxnard, Ventura area, and there's a lot of Japanese in this area that had settled there after World War II, and it's an agricultural area, and there's a lot of Hispanic, and the church I grew up in, I mean, we had a Japanese Nisei fellowship, and we had, Hispanics and African Americans and European Americans, and when we had a potluck at church, it was a multicultural dining experience, and it wasn't just the food. I was in the youth choir, and we were a touring youth choir, and we were called the Many Shades of Joy.
Yes.
Because when we were up there, we were very much many shades. And I realized, like, in thinking about what we were going to talk about today, I realized how blessed I am to have really had that very diverse environment. I mean, I grew up in a house where we had a Japanese American family on one side, and we had a Mexican American family on the other side, and we got tamales at Christmas and strawberries in the spring, and
yes,
and I realized, like, I feel like my experience growing up has been very rich because of all of the diversity. And then my career in San Diego, I've also had, particularly working in manufacturing, a lot of diversity in the workforce. And I think having grown up that way, it was maybe easier for me in some ways to be able to relate to people that are very different.
Yes.
at one workforce, we had a lot of Buddhists. So I remember actually studying, like, well, what exactly is Buddhism? Because I want to understand, like, where their value system comes from. And I think that has helped me be able to just even understand my own faith differently.
Yes.
Or better, maybe not differently.
Yes,
but,
through different lenses.
Yeah. And so I was thinking about Reverend Brittany's sermon a couple weeks ago, where she was talking about leaving as an opportunity to get new perspectives, to sometimes be uncomfortable and learning to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And I feel like loving your immigrant neighbor is sort of the flip side of that.
Yes.
It's seeing things through a different perspective of somebody who has themselves left home and come here and is probably uncomfortable and learning to be comfortable with that. And sometimes that's challenging for us whose home and community they're coming into.
Yes.
And I think that's part of what we're seeing right now. And I think, but God also says in Leviticus, like you were immigrants in Egypt.
Yes.
We are all immigrants.
Yes.
I mean, in this country, if you go back far enough, even the people we call Native Americans actually came from somewhere else, according to most historians, right? So at some point, like, we are all immigrants.
So as
even if we didn't come here from another country, our ancestors did.
I was intrigued by your sharing of your family of origin as you talk about immigrants that you run into. Would you like to tell us a little bit about?
Well, I think what I said to you was on my father's side, I'm actually second generation. You
don't even go far,
right? I mean, because we kind of think as white people in this country, like we think that this is our nation, and it's like, well, on one side of my family, generations of farm folk in Indiana, but on my other side, my grandfather was an alien. Right? He came from Britain.
Wow.
And married my grandmother in the 1920s.
Okay.
And she always was very careful to say that he was a citizen when he married her.
So there's something going on there.
Right? And so, like, it was somehow important to her that she didn't marry it. But the funny thing is, we actually found his naturalization certificate after they were all passed, and we're not so sure that he was a citizen when she married him. I don't know if he was misled her or if she just was misleading other people, but
there's some tendency, something about our human nature who do not want to share the whole truth. But if we go back to your history, just 2 generations, there's some hidden truth about that too.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see how you connected God saying, remember you were aliens in the land of Egypt. And remember those treatment of others. And that's the basis of your care for others. And you remembered your grandfather coming from another country and your grandma trying to hide that fact about the immigration history. And how remembrance actually helps us align our faith and our practice. And when we opened up our church, a lot of migrants came in, and I was nervous about getting our volunteers ready to serve them. And I realized these are the people who do not want to be served. These are the people who wanted to contribute to the operation of the shelter. So after a week, I became hands-off. So the migrants were running the shelter, and they were cleaning the restroom that they used, and they were organizing the clothes that were donated. They wanted to become part of the community and leaders of the community. And I remember later making name tags, transportation. or registration or food, so that everyone among the shelter people can be in charge of their own little community. And I also remember you were sharing about your upbringing, your neighborhood as you were growing up. Out of my 6 years of ministry in this church, maybe those 2 months were the longest working hour days. However, I remember sitting down after 10 p.m. listening to this new migrant's story and how this person came, listening to two women in love, how they fled their home to find a home that welcomes two women in love. We ended up marrying them in this church, and these migrants threw a party and brought cake, and they were dancing, and I forgot that I learned to do salsa dancing. Out of all these 2 years, they are the one who brought out joy from me. So we weren't just the givers. We weren't in the upper hands offering help. We were receiving lots of love and curiosity and storytelling and new relationship and all of that, and how fun that is. So actually they brought the divine image of God from me, and it was revealing relationship for both parties. So,
and I love what you said about they didn't come basically with their hands out. And I think this is how a lot of people relate to immigrants, because this is what they're told, and they're not. People who immigrate here, and who immigrate anywhere really, want to be a contribution, and they want to be part of the community, and they want to be able to make a difference and build a life for themselves by
and they
connecting.
want to make their community to be safe and healthy.
Exactly. And I think that's a little bit different lens to look through when we think of who are immigrants in our community than what kind of is showing up right now. So
And immigration is often presented as a choice between compassion and safety, security, and between welcoming people and respecting law. But Scripture asks us to begin somewhere more fundamental. Who is this Nyla Marson in front of me? Who is this migrant before us? Before someone is described as documented or undocumented, citizen or non-citizen, newcomer or stranger, that person is a beloved child of God. And that's the lesson we are taking away from this chapter. And affirming the image of God does not answer every political question, but it should determine how we speak to them, how we listen to them, and what forms of treatment we are willing to accept. And no political disagreement gives us permission to dehumanize another person. So this book, Leviticus, does not simply tell us to have kind feelings towards immigrants. It says, go action. So do not oppress them. Treat them like citizens among you. Love them as yourself. And that became the core of Jesus' teaching as well. So biblical love is more than an emotion. It takes practical and public form. So, as we think about migrants, I would like to ask, what are some practical ways people can stand with migrant neighbors, even if they cannot join you in a protest? What could be good ways?
Well, we would love to have other people join us.
Yes. What other ways can they?
And there are other ways. I mean, I think part of it is increasing your own awareness. Like understand what is going on. And part of that is looking at the news, reading things. I mean, there's a lot of stories out there. And so you don't have to go out and protest to hear some of those stories, but you do have to make an intention to maybe listen or listen for what's going on in the world around us. And maybe, I think, listen with God in your heart so that because people will say, well, I never know, I don't know what's true or what's not true. And that is something to discern. And I think, like for me, I kind of look at, well, what do I think God's telling me in this story? Like, what is there for me to learn or to take away that will help me understand how to better communicate with immigrants or with other people about what's happening with immigrants? And so I think that's a big thing, is to just kind of realize, don't look away. Right?
Yes.
I mean, that sometimes it's that being uncomfortable.
Yes.
About what's going on. I think the other thing is, like, kind of what you were saying, is to look at, to look at other people as a child of God. And even when you don't agree with them, or you think, you have biases about them or something, like, maybe also look and say, well, what's there that I can connect with? Because I think just making that connection. I mean, sometimes just sitting on the bus and saying hi to somebody, and sometimes people will respond back, and next thing you know, you're in a conversation. And, and you've learned something new about this person. And maybe they go on and you never see them again, but you've learned something new that you can take to your next interaction also.
So it sounds like you're suggesting to our listeners and myself to see the other person as a bearer of the image of God, the Imago Dei, and to start conversing them and engaging with them and listening to their stories instead of looking away. So these are good takeaway. Thanks for joining me today, Nyla. Your faithful witness out in the courthouse, and your sharing your stories help us be a better person to find the divine image in every person we run into. So as we continue to reflect on these stories and this chapter, we invite you to consider these questions. Where do you recognize the image of God in your everyday life? How might your spiritual practices lead you towards greater love and justice, like she does? What have you come to understand differently about migrants among us, as we always do? So I hope you continue this conversation with your friends and whoever is around, even with your migrant friend that you run into in a grocery store or restaurant. So I hope you find the divine image in every person you run into each day and find abundant love in your conversation. So thanks for listening, and see you next time.
This is a production of First United Methodist Church of San Diego. To learn more about our events and ministries and to access additional learning resources, visit fumcsd.org.